Welcome to the HerbWorks podcast featuring Roger Drummer, the formulator at HerbWorks.com. An educator in the field of nutrition and Chinese herbalism, Roger has a unique ability to keep things simple by taking all the guesswork out of complicated health issues. HerbWorks is committed to helping you improve your health and enhance your life through herbs and common sense.
Hello, and welcome to another HerbWorks podcast. I'm Laura.
And this is Roger Drummer.
And today's topic is brain basics. That's kind of a mouthful. Brain basics. What are we talking about today, Mr. Drummer?
Well, the basics of brain health. What does it take to have a healthy brain? What little tips, you can do every day to make sure your brain is functioning at its optimum level.
Okay. So does that mean taking certain supplements, eating a certain way? What are we talking about here?
Well, really, it starts off with food. You want to make sure that your brain is being fed what it needs to function right. And then after that, you get into supplements, you get into things like stress, you get into herbs that balance your brain. But really, you have to start out with the idea of eating to feed your brain.
So I'm going to get a brainy breakfast. Is that what you're saying?
You're going to have a brainy breakfast, yeah.
A brainy breakfast. All right, Roger. So what does a brainy breakfast look like?
Well, your brain wants protein in the morning. Now, this is really important, especially if you have cravings for sugar. Because, cravings for sugar is an indication that your brain is missing protein.
Is it?
Yes. And if you have cravings for sugar, it's the number one thing that screws up any diet that you're on, because you lose your willpower and then you start grabbing carbohydrates to feed your sugar addiction. But it all goes back to, again, the fact that your brain is missing protein.
But there's a lot of heavy meat eaters that do the whole, McDonald's, have a hamburger and a milkshake thing. They're getting lots of protein, quote, from meat eating.
Oh, no. We're not a country that's protein deficient.
Right.
But we're a country that usually has protein at the wrong time of the day.
That sounds like a whole nother subject.
No, it's the same subject.
Are you talking about having protein for breakfast then?
Protein. Here's the thing about sugar cravings. When you wake up in the morning, your brain wants to stimulate a certain neurotransmitter called dopamine.
Okay, most people have heard of that.
To do that, you have to eat protein. Now, the average person who doesn't have any imbalances, they're fairly healthy, they can have a varied breakfast. Let's say they can have a mix of proteins and fats and some carbohydrates, that type of thing, because their brain's not real deficient. But when your brain's deficient enough in protein and you're having sugar cravings, then you have to take care of that dopamine deficiency. And the only way to do that is to have just a pure protein food for breakfast, whatever time of the day that means for you. In other words, your first meal. Your first food has to be a protein. And then what happens?
So you're saying no donuts for breakfast?
No donuts for breakfast. That's probably why you have a dopamine deficiency.
It's a donut problem.
It's a donut problem. And so basically, when you have that piece of protein by itself,
right,
your body will take the amino acid tyrosine out of that and send it up to your brain to make dopamine. And then once you do that, let's say you did that strictly for 7 days in a row, and you watch the rest of your diet. So, let's say you had a 7-day plan to get your brain back.
7 days to brain health?
7 days to get your brain, take control of your sugar cravings, right?
Okay.
So first thing in the morning, you had a piece of protein. Your brain starts to make dopamine. The next meal you can have a little protein and a lot of vegetables and maybe some fats, but you don't want to have any sugary foods, right? Because you're training your brain for a week. So you want to cut way back on your carbs. You can have all the carbs you want out of vegetables, but probably no grains for a week just to get your brain back up to par.
Are you saying no grains for breakfast?
No grains during the day if you really have sugar cravings. If you're just resetting your brain and want a little more dopamine, it's not that important past the first meal. But if you're already someone who's got extreme sugar cravings, you have to be a little strict here to get control of that. And once you do, you'll have control of anything you want to do with your diet.
All right. So sugar cravings and brain function, is that necessarily this intertwined, what you're talking about?
It's that intertwined because your sugar cravings put you in a position to lose control of your brain. You're always functioning and doing everything throughout the day according to what you're craving next. According to grabbing something, sugar cravings put you in a position to where you're always grabbing something to change the way you feel.
Something that spikes your
either spikes your
energy
sugar
level a little bit,
or changes the way you feel. It could be a cigarette, could be more caffeine, or it could be alcohol, could be drugs, sugar, any of these things. They kind of work the same way. So if you can satisfy your dopamine requirements first thing in the morning, you can make an impact on all those things.
Okay, so what is this big bang brain breakfast that we're talking about?
Here's the thing. Here's the thing. If you can either have a protein drink that's all protein, maybe a little fat, but no carbs, or you can have a piece of chicken, you can have a piece of fish, but you have to have it by itself and not eat anything else for 1 to 2 hours afterward.
So what about like full English breakfast? Sausages, what do you call them? Bangers, sausages,
You can
eggs.
do that 2 or 3 weeks from now, but in this first week, you're just thinking about changing your brain.
So eggs, no toast?
No eggs, no toast.
No eggs, no toast.
No
Why not
eggs?
eggs?
No toast. Because
that's protein.
It's a mixture of things, and believe me, you won't eat them without toast. So don't tell me you're going to.
You can have an omelet with no toast.
I'm sorry, nobody's going to do it. And it's too much fat. It's not a pure protein food. So here you go. You've now eaten this protein. You've made dopamine. Your brain starts to change. Now, this is why it doesn't work, or it doesn't matter that everybody eats way too much protein anyway, because they don't usually do it first thing in the morning. What most people do is they wake up, they have coffee with a bunch of sugar in it, they have some orange juice, they have toast, it's all carbohydrates, and they're basically building up serotonin, which wants to relax them and put them to sleep. And then when their sugar drops, they just get groggy, they want more, they just back pounding on more sugar. That's the problem with the diet. And this is why you start out with a protein to change all that.
So what if they're having bacon with their coffee or sausages with their coffee or some kind of...
If you're already having sugar cravings, then your brain is not functioning right. And it needs to peak your dopamine first thing in the morning. That doesn't mean a week and a half from now you can't have eggs and bacon and toast for breakfast because your brain is in a different position. It just means that you have to fix your situation right now. And you do that by restricting carbohydrates and sugar, having pure protein first thing in the morning, because having protein at lunch after having a heavy carb breakfast is not going to do it. Your brain is already set up on a loop of sugar and serotonin, and you're just not going to function right.
All right, so 2 questions for you then. What if you're a vegetarian? Your options, if you're saying no eggs, if you're vegetarian, then what's that protein source going to be?
It could be a protein shake. That's easy to do. Most vegetarians...
Like pea protein, whey protein?
Any type of protein shake.
Okay.
As long as it's mostly protein.
And then what if you're somebody that works out before they have their first meal or works out after they have their first meal? How would that look for people that are...
It doesn't change anything. You're still, your first time that you have protein, your first meal of the day is going to be a pure protein food so that you can fix your dopamine issue with your brain.
Okay.
And once you do that, you're going to take care of all cravings.
So once we've had our big bang brain breakfast, what do we have after that? What do we do?
Well, you can eat
our
any
brain better?
vegetables you want that week, and you can eat other protein with it. You can have some fats with it, but you want to restrict your carbs because, again, you're having cravings for sugar, and you have to fix that. Once you fix that, then you're in control of how your brain functions, and your whole day starts to change because you're not coming from a position of always craving something.
Okay, so what do you use as far as supplements, herbs? You are the herb man, so what else do you use besides food, kind of repositioning your diet? Sounds like that's a much larger topic for stopping sugar cravings over a week long. That's kind of like a dietary menu. What else could you do just on a regular basis?
Well, on a regular basis, you have to include other foods that feed your brain. But once you've dealt with your sugar cravings and your brain is now producing more dopamine, and the reason you want to pay attention to this is because everybody's brain is run by one of the four major neurotransmitters. In other words, everybody, you've heard of personality types, well, there's
Sure.
brain types. You have four major neurotransmitters.
Are you saying there's brain types like how personality types are, where you're an extrovert, you're an introvert,
There's people
you're a
whose
fixer, you're a
brains are
dreamer?
more predominant in one neurotransmitter. So since most people have a deficiency of dopamine, and this is why we have so much sugar cravings, you correct that. And then you start to eat a diet that balances your neurotransmitters. That's good for feeding your head. You know, one of the things that's great for your brain, one of the best things is actually eating eggs. And yet for the last 30 years, doctors have been telling everybody not to eat eggs. You know, eat an egg once a week, which is like a joke.
So omelet parlors are going to rejoice now that we've made this podcast.
Because eggs are probably the single most richest source of something called choline, which you absolutely have to run one of the other major neurotransmitters in your brain, which is acetylcholine. Mm-hmm. So if you don't have acetylcholine, then your brain is functioning too slow, can't process information too quickly, you don't feel like you have access to memories, you're forgetful. All these different things happen when you're choline deficient. And so
that sounds kind of like middle age.
It's a middle-aged thing, because almost everybody in this country, when they start thinking about their health, the first thing they think of is not eating eggs. And so they don't have any other sources of choline in their diet, and so they're mostly deficient.
Okay,
if you look at Alzheimer's is considered a extreme deficiency of acetylcholine.
So what other nutrients are you talking about? You've talked about choline, acetylcholine. Are those different ways that your brain functions personality-wise? How is that connected with the personality?
Well,
saying?
any deficiency in your brain can have an effect on your personality, because you feel slow and you feel sometimes just dumb. You know, I talk to a lot of people that are in their 50s, and they think that...
Senior moments?
Yeah, they think that the world has passed them by because they can't understand anything. And what you find out is their brain's just running slow. It needs nutrients. It needs choline. It needs some dopamine. They're just looking at the end effect, which is they can't understand technology very well, or things seem to be moving too fast, and they don't realize it's probably because their brain is missing certain nutrients, and so it's just not running too fast.
It's not because their brain's already full of so much wisdom.
No, it's usually not what it is. So basically, they might be missing B vitamins, like folic acid and B12, things that help with the actual health of your neurons, and choline, which besides building acetylcholine is the neurotransmitter that determines how fast your brain processes information. But besides that, choline is used in every cellular membrane. It's used to make the myelin sheath on your nerves. It's integral to the state of health of every cell in your entire body. And if you're deficient, your brain really suffers from it.
So you can make your brain have better health and better function by including these particular acetylcholine, other things in your diet, but
you can't have acetylcholine in your diet. Acetylcholine is the neurotransmitter, which is the end result of having choline in your diet. And choline is from eggs, from certain meats, fish, but the richest source of choline in your diet is eggs.
Okay, so we've just had our wonderful eggs for breakfast, but not the first week. And what else are you doing to build brain health?
Well, when you move past food, the first thing you want to do is you want to look at your diet, correct things. So if you have sugar cravings, you've now done your dopamine fix for a week or so, and you fixed your brain. You're paying attention to having good protein a couple times a day at least. A lot of experts in brain health say you have to have a piece of protein 3 times a day. Your brain loves it.
Well, as vegetarians, we certainly know that you have to have protein quite often when you're a vegetarian, because you're not having that larger piece of denser protein usually.
I found that when I was a vegetarian, and I was for close to 30 years, before I moved into being a pescatarian. It took me that long to figure out how to spell that, so it took me a while to get into it.
Do we know how to spell it correctly now? We won't even go there.
We won't go there. But I did notice that vegetarian proteins didn't stay with me that long, and they didn't make me feel the same way as them when I discovered with eating fish. And so there is something to that, but you have to have a piece of protein 3 times a day. So every meal you make sure there is a protein source, whatever that is from, but you don't want to overdo it. Most meat eaters eat way too much protein. You shouldn't have more than probably 25 to 30 grams at a sitting. It's not good for you, but it's really great for you if you have the right amounts and you're feeding your brain. You make sure that you have rich sources of choline in your diet, and then you want to eat whole foods, things that are organic, leafy greens, fruits that have a lot of color to them. All these antioxidants deal with inflammatory chemicals or responses in your body that may be disrupting your brain.
So why does reducing inflammatory response help your brain?
Because like any other part of aging, a lot of aging of your brain is due to increased levels of inflammation.
The same as what people think about in their arteries with plaque. You have too much plaque in your arteries, you're not working correctly.
Or with arthritis.
Or inflammation is leading to other diseases.
Right. So the inflammation in your brain causes it to age more rapidly, and then causes you to burn up nutrients at a faster rate because your body's always trying to correct something. But most of the time your inflammation is related to either toxic exposure, chemicals that are in your diet, or the one that most people don't think about is just lack of nutrients. When you don't have a nutrient to run a certain process, that process breaks down and creates its own inflammation. Kind of like a car that's running on half the amount of oil that it's supposed to have. You can still start your car and drive down the road. It'll drive really well when it's young and with half the oil in it. But it's aging rapidly, and it's not going to last that long.
Right. Or if you're a gardener, the soil that you put in has to do with how rich, what nutrients your plant has to grow from.
And you can grow things with half the nutrients missing, but there won't be much in the food.
Right. It'll be different.
That's the difference.
So as an herbalist, what do you do to help with inflammation in the brain, to reduce inflammation in the brain?
Well, the first thing you want to look at is your levels of stress. And the reason for that is that elevated levels of stress hormone, cortisol, and adrenaline actually cause the memory center of your brain, which is called the hippocampus, to become inflamed, and it causes it to soak up more inflammatory chemicals that make it up into your brain. So you have to reduce stress hormone.
Wait a minute. Can you back up for just a
Because it's a protective element for your brain.
You're saying that when you have inflammation in one particular part, in this instance,
hippocampus of the brain,
it has inflammation, and now it's becoming more inflamed. Why?
Excess cortisol is an inflammatory chemical. When you have too much of that in your brain, it seems to cause the memory center, the hippocampus, to soak up even more inflammatory chemicals. It may be due to the fact that excessive stress and inflammation weakens the blood-brain barrier, so more chemicals make it up into your brain. Whenever you have a virus or you're sick, or you have a bout of really extreme stress or some other condition, your blood-brain barrier actually lets more inflammatory chemicals up into your brain.
Right.
And that can be reacting with the cortisol to create more inflammation. So you really want to nip this whole excessive stress in the bud before it starts deteriorating your brain function. The other thing it does...
And how do you do that with herbs then? How are you nipping inflammation in the bud?
Well, adaptogenic herbs are basically substances that you can take that regulate the glands that are involved in the stress response. And by regulating it, what it means is that they make those glands healthier so you can have a healthy stress response and then shut it off after the danger is over. This is the part that's missing for most people. They've lost the ability to shut off the stress response, so they're always stuck in a low level of stress, which energetically for your brain, that means your brain is always down into a certain area where you're in fight or flight, which means you don't have your energy very often up in the what they call the frontal lobe or the top of your head, to where there's more thoughts of creativity and having vision about what you want to do. You're locked down in the deeper, oldest part of your brain, which just is a fight or flight response to everything. And you start seeing life at every moment as a danger to you.
So chronic stress, how it affects your perspective, basically, is what you're talking about.
Right.
So what do you formulate with these herbs, obviously, for the different formulas that you have on the market? What are some of the things that you use for adaptogenic herbs?
Adaptogenic herbs, besides the fact that they help regulate your stress response, so you're not always locked in fight or flight, but they have a very positive effect on your pituitary and your pineal gland, on your hypothalamus. These are all glands that we're just starting to discover actually have an ability to energize parts of your brain. And so adaptogens like rhodiola, ashwagandha, and reishi mushroom are three of the main ones that have this positive effect of balancing your pituitary and your hypothalamus and the stress response. Mm-hmm. So what that does is that it not only has an effect of lowering stress hormone, but you could say they're anti-inflammatories for your brain.
Wow, that's pretty interesting. And can anybody just go get these herbs? I mean, what's the magic to working with these herbs or taking these herbs?
Well, the magic to adaptogens is finding the right dose and the right formula of them.
And that's what you do.
And that's what I do. But adaptogens do so much for your brain. And besides this whole stress response, they now have research showing that they affect the mitochondria of your brain cells and how they actually make ATP, which is that chemical that the mitochondria produces to make energy. In fact, ATP is the source of like 98% of all the energy in your entire brain and body. And adaptogens have an effect of helping you to not only make more ATP, but actually recycling ATP in the mitochondria. So they have a huge, broad range effect. And when you match those up with certain nutrients, making sure your body has enough choline from your diet, certain B vitamins, and then there's some things like D-ribose that athletes use. You know, D-ribose is a type of sugar your body actually makes out of your diet, but it doesn't make much. And if you're an athlete or someone who just, wants to take care of their brain, adding a little D-ribose to your diet just makes it easy for your brain to always have an adequate supply of ATP.
So how do you add D-ribose?
It's just a powder. You can buy it. I use it in certain formulas I have, but you can buy D-ribose by itself in a little container. Mm-hmm. If you dump it into water, you can barely even taste it. It's the most benign, plain.
And you use it in your formulas?
I use it in my formulas. I do counseling with certain athletes, and I put it in as part of their program. They take scoops of it depending on how hard they work out.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So brain basics and making your brain function better. We've talked about having a breakfast that is protein-based. We've talked about having protein throughout the day in different servings, about making sure that you're getting your leafy greens, your vegetables, having less, from a dietary perspective, having perhaps less carbohydrates than what you think you need in an effort to address sugar cravings. You've talked about using adaptogenic herbs, basically. What else can someone do?
Well, there's a lot of discussion these days about fats for your brain. And, this is something new the last 5 years where all this research is coming out about your brain and fat. And this kind of ties in with the whole thing with dopamine and sugar cravings. And it's really an important point that most people really need to pay attention to as far as brain health. If you have sugar cravings, and we talked about dopamine deficiency, but if you have sugar cravings, that probably means that you have elevated blood sugar most of the time. And basically that means that you have excessive inflammation already from too much sugar in your system and too much insulin response, and that you're probably insulin resistant, meaning that your cells are not listening to the signal from insulin and taking up sugar the way they're supposed to because you have too much of it all the time. Now, if you have that situation where you wake up in the morning and your blood sugar is over 100, your brain's probably in a pre-diabetic state, meaning that it's not responding to sugar properly, and it's probably missing something else, which is essential fats for your brain. And this is why the big craze started with coconut oil.
What kind of fats do you use in your diet?
Well, I take fish oil.
As a supplement?
As a supplement. Mm-hmm. I think that's one thing that almost everybody needs to do. If you're thinking about doing something that's anti-aging and just direct food for your brain, you need to look at using an omega-3 supplement.
Okay. What else do you use?
And so that, and I use MCT oil or coconut oil. And
or does that mean that's another name for it? Or
MCT oil is a fraction of coconut oil. Coconut oil has MCT in it, but it's not just MCT oil. Coconut oil is about 50% MCT. And MCT basically just means medium chain triglyceride. Mm-hmm. It's a form of fat. And the reason it's become so popular and why people love it so much is because you can digest that or utilize it as a source of energy for your brain cells, for your heart, for your entire system without processing it much. It turns into a water-soluble fat called a ketone, and your brain can use that. So if you go to the process of lowering your blood sugar and then you take coconut oil or MCT, what you'll notice is that your brain seems to pick up energy. Mm-hmm. It seems to be energized. And if it does, that pretty much means that you had a little too much sugar, and now your brain cells have an option. They're actually burning something else for fuel, and you get this mental clarity out of it, and you seem to just wake up.
So a lot of different traditional cuisines around the world have certain fats that they rely on or are used specifically to that diet. For instance, the Mediterranean diet has olive oil. The Indian diet has ghee. In America, it used to be lard, I guess. Lard or butter, right? Certain other cultures use the coconut oil, as you were saying. What else is there besides these oils that has been proven time and time again to be something that is really great for your brain health?
Well, besides those oils, and those are all really good oils.
Which ones, the lard or the ghee?
The coconut oil, the olive oil. Olive oil has amazing anti-inflammatory properties in it. It's great stuff. MCT oil is direct food for your brain. But raw nuts, things like walnuts. Walnuts are a huge source of omega-3 fatty acids. They're great for your brain. For thousands of years, the Chinese in Chinese medicine have always said walnuts are a brain food. Mm-hmm. And it's not until the last 100 years we realized that they contain some of the richest sources of plant-based omega-3 fatty acids.
I thought it was just because they look like little brains.
Well, that would be probably what tipped them off to begin with. They do look like a little brain.
They do look like a little brain. Oh, my goodness.
But those things are all really good for your brain. It's great to actually have those as part of your diet.
Yeah.
But again, most people still need to supplement, and they have to look at things like, outside of their food, they have to look at things like B vitamins. Everybody should be taking some sort of folic acid. And by folic acid, I mean the methylfolate, the form that you can actually use. They need to take methylcobalamin, which is the active form of B12. They need to be looking at just basic things their brain actually needs to age properly.
Because the intent of having, better brain function, obviously, is how that affects your life. When your brain has less inflammation, when your brain is absorbing new information, right? So if you have less inflammation, you're able to absorb more information or process it. I mean, is that what you're saying?
That's basically what it is about. A better brain is a better life. Mm-hmm. You don't want to, when you become 60, have a brain that's literally 80 years old. You want to reverse that. It'd be great if you were 80 years old and had a brain that was 60.
Right.
And that's, all this aging has to do with a lack of nutrients and the amount of inflammation that causes, way too much stress, nutritional stress, all these different things prematurely age your brain. And so, but you can do something about it now before the symptoms show up by just taking care of your brain, just eating a diet and having a supplement program that feeds your head.
Okay. Well, where can people find more information about supplements and any other lectures that you have had about nutrition, brain nutrition?
Well, one of the things I talk about a lot and write a lot of articles on is brain health, stress, everything that's related to that. Trying to peak brain function, keep you healthy. So you can go to HerbWorks.com and look up my blog and find a host of other articles on the same subject.
Super. And maybe we'll need to do a YouTube on a brain breakfast.
There you go.
Brain breakfast coming soon. Well, thanks again for tuning in, everyone. This has been Laura with the HerbWorks podcast.
And Roger Drummer signing off. And thank you for tuning in to the HerbWorks podcast. And come and see me anytime at HerbWorks.com.